March 17, 1968, a few miles west of Chu Lai, South Vietnam. The sun had barely risen, yet the jungle already breathed with a wet, heavy heat that clung to every surface. The morning fog drifted through the trees like pale smoke shifting in and out of the vines that draped over the canopy. Beneath that cover, a patrol from Charlie Company 1st Battalion 20th Infantry Regiment moved slowly along a narrow animal trail. M16 rifles, raised boots sinking into mud that smelled of rotting earth and stagnant water. Specialist David Rourke, 20 years old and on his 6th month in country, felt the weight of the humidity pressing straight through his uniform. Every sound sharpened his nerves. The chirp of cicadas, a branch snapping under a teammate's foot, the faint slosh of water trapped inside their boots. The jungle seemed alive in ways he still hadn't learned to understand. It breathed, moved, and watched. Rourke paused and lifted a fist. The column froze. Ahead, the trail dipped into a darker stretch of undergrowth where the light barely touched the ground. Sergeant William McAllister came up beside him, sweat dripping from the rim of his helmet. "You see something," Mac whispered. "Don't know," Rourke murmured back. "Feels wrong." In Vietnam, feeling wrong often meant the difference between life and death. The enemy rarely showed themselves. They preferred silence, shadows, patience. Weeks earlier, another platoon had vanished only a few kilometers from this spot. No firefight, no radio call, just a sudden eruption of traps and rifle bursts, so quick the survivors never saw anyone fire. Mac motioned the point man forward. Private Jimmy Hale, the youngest in the squad, barely 18. Hale swallowed hard and stepped past the curtain of vines. His rifle trembled in his grip, and Rourke caught the flicker of fear in the kid's eyes. Everyone had seen that look at some point. 3 days in the jungle had a way of stripping bravado from even the toughest men. As the column crept deeper into the ravine, the smell changed. It shifted from swampy moisture to something sharper, metallic, earthy, unsettlingly familiar. Rourke knew that scent from the stories older guys told in hushed voices. It was the smell of disturbed ground, the smell that often preceded traps. Mac raised 2 fingers, signaling everyone to spread and check for tripwires. The jungle swallowed them in layers of green, each soldier only barely visible to the man beside him. Hale scanned ahead carefully, taking painstaking steps. That was when he saw it. A cluster of leaves piled neatly in a circle, too neatly. Hale crouched, brushing a thin layer aside, and froze. Beneath it, sharpened bamboo stakes glistened with moisture. Some were dark-stained, coated with a foul mixture meant to infect wounds. A punji pit nearly impossible to spot until a man was already falling into it. Hale exhaled shakily and lifted his hand to signal the rest of the squad. His voice came out in a trembling whisper. "Trap. Big one." Mac nodded grimly. "They're funneling us." Everyone stepped back slow. But stepping back did nothing to ease the feeling crawling up Rourke's spine. If there was one punji pit, there were more dozens maybe. And the Viet Cong rarely relied on one tactic alone. They layered traps the way other armies layered defenses. The forest suddenly went quiet. Even the insects paused. Then came the sound, faint metallic, almost a click. Rourke turned his head sharply. Private Alan Cordell, 2 men behind him, had brushed against something thin and nearly invisible. A wire stretched along the trunk of a fallen log. Cordell's eyes widened. Mac hissed, "Don't move." But the jungle reacted faster than any of them. A deafening blast ripped through the ravine as the bouncing Betty leapt from the ground. It rose past Cordell's knee, a split second of terrifying weightlessness before exploding mid-air. The shockwave slammed through the patrol. Dirt and shredded foliage blasted outward. Rourke hit the ground, hard ears ringing, chest burning. Shouts mixed with groans. Something warm and wet hit his face blood, but he didn't know whose. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Mac yelling orders, dragging wounded men into cover. Hale scrambled backward, face pale, coughing from the dust. The jungle closed in again, swallowing the echo of the explosion until only the distant cry of a bird remained. No enemy appeared. No follow-up attack. Just the knowledge that unseen hands had planted that trap days, maybe hours earlier, with the calm intent to maim whoever stumbled into it. Rourke tried to steady his breathing. The patrol wasn't under fire, yet the terror felt worse than bullets. Because in this place, the enemy didn't need to be present to hurt them. The jungle was the enemy, and it waited patiently for mistakes. Mac knelt beside the wounded, his voice steady despite the shaking in his hands. "This is what they don't tell you back home," he muttered. "This is the kind of war you don't talk about unless you have to." Rourke swallowed hard. He knew Mac was right. There were horrors here that soldiers buried deep, too ashamed or too afraid to bring back with them. This ambush of trapped, silent, calculated, vicious was only the beginning. And the deeper they moved into the jungle, the more they realized they weren't just fighting fighters. They were fighting ghosts. By late afternoon, the heat grew so intense that even breathing felt like work. The ground steamed where the blast had torn up soil, filling the air with the scent of wet clay and the sour trace of blood. Mac moved among the wounded, wrapping shrapnel cuts with field dressings, his hands moving with a medic's steadiness, even though he wasn't one. Private Cordell, the man caught by the bouncing Betty, lay on a poncho beside a tree. Both his legs were torn open. He drifted in and out of consciousness, reaching for someone who wasn't there, murmuring half-formed words. Rourke knelt beside him, brushing debris from his helmet. Cordell's voice came faintly. "It was just a wire." "I know," Rourke whispered. "Just hang on." That was the cruelty of it. Death didn't always come from firefights. Sometimes it hung invisible in the air, waiting patiently for a boot or a sleeve to disturb it. By the time dusk settled over the treetops, shadows stretched long across the jungle floor. Thick fog began to seep through the underbrush, swirling around the men like slow-moving smoke. Lieutenant Ellery gave the order to establish a night perimeter. No one argued. The blast had drained the confidence out of them, leaving only the raw instinct to survive until sunrise. They formed a circular camp on a slight ridge, spacing themselves, so every angle of approach was covered. Claymore mines were set facing outward, trip flares tied low to catch any movement creeping toward them. The trees loomed so close together it felt as if the forest leaned in to listen to their every breath. Night in Vietnam wasn't darkness. It was something heavier, something alive. By 2100 hours, the jungle had swallowed every trace of daylight. The air seemed to vibrate with the drone of insects. Strange hoots echoed from unseen branches. Mossy vines swung slightly even without wind. At times, the soldiers thought they saw faces in the leaves, shapes moving where no shape should be. Rourke sat in his hole with Hale beside him, both staring into the void. The humidity pressed against them like a physical force, beating sweat across their arms and necks. Hale kept wiping his palms on his trousers, his breathing quick and shallow. "You all right?" Rourke asked. Hale nodded, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "I just don't like the dark here. Feels like something's watching." Rourke didn't respond, but he felt it too. Every man did. Around midnight, a faint rustle drifted through the trees. Not the casual shifting of leaves, not the clatter of a monkey hopping branches. This was slower, deliberate, intentional. Mac crawled to Ellery and whispered, "Movement." Maybe 2 o'clock. They listened. The jungle held its breath. Then another sound followed, a soft footfall, then another circling the outer edge of the perimeter. Ellery lifted his hand. "Hold fire." The Viet Cong favored night. They knew the terrain, the sounds, the paths. Most of all, they knew fear, how to feed it, how to wield it. They could stalk a patrol for miles, waiting for exhaustion to create mistakes. And they often came close without ever attacking, letting the paranoia eat at their enemy one heartbeat at a time. A twig snapped. Hale jolted, finger tightening on his trigger. Rourke placed a steadying hand on the rifle barrel, pushing it gently downward. Then it happened, soft, almost mocking, whispering. Not English, not quite Vietnamese either. More like breath pushing through teeth. The sound drifted around them, weaving between trees, slipping in and out of the mist. Some men clenched their eyes shut. Others gripped their rifles so hard their knuckles whitened. Cordell, still barely conscious, whimpered at the voices circling their position. A faint metallic click followed. Ellery stiffened. "Trip flare," he breathed. A flash erupted on the far edge of the perimeter, bathing the jungle in a harsh white glow. Shapes darted through the light too fast to clearly see. Maybe 2 figures, maybe 5. Maybe none at all, just branches snapping under the weight of their imagination. A burst of gunfire cracked the silence. One of the rear guards had squeezed the trigger in panic. The muzzle flashes lit the trees in quick jolts of orange. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Ellery hissed, but his voice was nearly drowned by gunshots. Rourke pulled Hale down into the mud as a second soldier fired wildly, bullets ripping through vines above their heads. The jungle answered only with silence. The moment the firing stopped, every man felt it, the forest watching again, waiting. The enemy never returned fire. They didn't have to. The psychological damage was already done. Mac crept from hole to hole, whispering the same reminder to each man. They want you scared. They want you firing blind. Don't give them what they want. But deep inside, Rourke knew that fear wasn't something you gave. It was something the jungle took. As the night stretched on, their nerves eroded grain by grain. Even when the sounds faded, no one slept. Not even for a moment. Some men clutched their rosaries. Others mouthed silent prayers. Hale kept his eyes fixed on the dark, refusing to blink. By dawn, the jungle was quiet again, as if the night had never happened. But every soldier carried the memory of the whispers, the footsteps, the unseen presence circling them like predators waiting to strike. Call it nerves, call it ghosts, call it the Viet Cong's mastery of psychological warfare. Whatever name they gave it, the fear stayed with them. Rourke watched Hale pack his gear with trembling fingers. No one spoke of the whispers from the night before. In Vietnam, silence became its own language. The things men didn't say weighed heavier than the things they did. The platoon moved out shortly after sunrise, stepping cautiously along a narrow path that twisted downhill. Fog still clung to the undergrowth, obscuring anything more than a few meters ahead. Even the radio operator specialist Frank Delaney kept his voice low as he relayed their new coordinates. Their objective was simple link-up with Bravo Company at a clearing near the river. But nothing in Vietnam was simple, and the route chosen by command cut straight through an area known to locals as Cu Rung Ma, the Ghost Woods. The name alone made the hairs on Rourke's arms rise. Mac took point this time, scanning every inch of soil for unnatural patterns. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, reading the ground the way others read faces. The heat pressed down harder with every minute, and even the trees dripped with sweat-like moisture. Half a mile in, Mac suddenly stopped and raised a clenched fist. Everyone froze. Rourke eased forward until he was beside him. Mac pointed to a patch of dirt that looked ordinary at first glance, just another square of mud scattered with leaves. But one corner of the ground seemed too flat, too uniform. "It's been tampered with," Mac whispered. Ellery signaled for the engineer Corporal Samuel Ortiz, who knelt and brushed the soil back carefully with a stick. Beneath the thin layer of mud, they saw a tightly woven mat of reeds covering a concealed cavity. Ortiz swallowed. "Step wrong here and you're gone." He lifted the mat, gently revealing an M2 stake trap, a savage device meant to impale a man from below. The stakes had been sharpened to needle points and coated with a blackish paste. "Poison," Ortiz muttered. "They want infections, slow deaths." Rourke felt sick. These traps weren't just weapons, they were messages. They said, "Every inch of this jungle belongs to us." The men skirted the trap with extreme care, but the enemy had never relied on just one. 30 minutes later, Hale, still shaky from the night before, stepped over a log and heard a faint snap. He froze, heart slamming against his ribs. "Don't move," Rourke whispered urgently. A thin vine ran from the side of the log into the brush. Ortiz followed it with his eyes tracing the path until he found a small wooden trigger box buried under leaves. "Grenade snare," Ortiz said. "Tripwire pulls the pin from an M26. The blast radius would have killed Hale instantly and likely wounded the 3 men nearest him. Sweat rolled down the private's face as Ortiz disabled the trap. Hale exhaled shakily and stepped back, legs trembling. "Eyes up, kid," Max said, voice calm but firm. "They hide these things everywhere. Roots, trees, water, even corpses sometimes." Hale swallowed hard. "Corpses." Ortiz nodded grimly. "They'll rig a body with explosives. You try to move it for a proper burial, boom." No one spoke after that. The deeper they went, the more elaborate the traps became. A pair of bamboo whips, spring-loaded and fitted with spikes, waited to snap shut on a man's chest. A hidden platform designed to collapse under weight, dropping the victim into a pit lined with metal fragments. A cluster of tripwires so thin they looked like spider silk arranged in a web that could trigger anything from fragmentation grenades to buried artillery shells. Every discovery added another layer of tension to the air. Shoulders tightened. Breathing grew shallow. Even Ellery's normally steady demeanor began to crack. But the worst came just before midday. The trail wound through a narrow passage of tall grass, the stalks rising high enough to brush against their helmets. Rourke hated this kind of terrain. You couldn't tell what was beneath your feet, and the grass muffled sounds until even footsteps seemed to come from far away. Mac raised his hand again more urgently this time. He knelt and parted the grass with his rifle barrel. A corpse lay across the trail, an ARVN soldier uniform, rotting chest hollowed by scavengers. His hands were stiff, clutching the air as if reaching for something in his final moments. One foot was tied to a vine. Something about the scene felt wrong. Ortiz crawled forward, eyes narrowing. "It's bait," he whispered. The vine connected to a tension device leading to a buried metal drum beneath the soil. Booby-trapped mortar shell, Ortiz confirmed. Big enough to take out half the platoon. A silence heavier than the heat settled over the men. Rourke stared at the corpse, wondering how long the soldier had been lying there, unknowingly guarding a deadly device even in death. The cruelty of it churned inside him. Mac murmured just loud enough for the others to hear. "This is why nobody back home understands. They think war's firefights and heroics. But out here, the ground itself wants you dead." Ortiz disabled the trap sweat pouring down his brow despite the shade. When they finally cleared the grass and stepped onto firmer soil, no one relaxed. The jungle had taught them something that morning: the enemy didn't need to shoot to break you. They could let fear do the killing. And fear was starting to take hold. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. No bird calls, no insects. Just the soft crunch of boots sinking into spongy leaf litter. The sudden silence made every soldier uneasy. In Vietnam, silence meant someone else was listening. Lieutenant Ellery halted the platoon and motioned for his squad leaders. Mac crouched beside him, wiping sweat from his brow. "This terrain is wrong," Ellery whispered. "Too still, too clean. They've been here." Mac nodded. "Feels like an ambush zone." They were moving along a natural corridor formed by vines and old-growth trees, an easy path to follow, which was exactly what worried them. The Viet Cong knew Americans relied on trails when possible. They used that predictability like a weapon. Rourke scanned the tree line, but the shadows blurred and blended until everything looked like potential movement. He felt the same creeping tension he'd felt during the night patrol, the sensation of unseen eyes tracking them. Specialist Delaney adjusted the radio antenna, whispering into his handset to report their position. Static crackled softly. Hale kept glancing upward, his helmet tilted back just enough to expose the worry in his eyes. Rourke tapped him lightly. "What's wrong? Thought I saw—" "Something," Hale murmured. "In the trees." Rourke followed his gaze, staring into the canopy. The branches swayed slightly, but there was no wind. A series of vines dangled like ropes, moving in slow, unnatural arcs. A faint rustle drifted down, a whisper of leaves pressing against bark. Ellery stiffened. "They're above us." Before anyone could react, a single shot cracked through the jungle. It came from high up, muffled by leaves. The bullet punched into the ground not far from Ortiz, spraying dirt. The men dove for cover, spreading out behind trees. Rourke pressed himself against a thick trunk, peering upward into the tangled chaos of vines and branches. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Sounded like a single sniper, Mac hissed. But one shot didn't make sense. A sniper didn't fire once and wait. They fired until their target stopped breathing. Unless the shot had a different purpose, testing reaction, checking position, gauging fear. A second shot rang out, this one grazing a tree trunk near Delaney's head. "Direction," Ellery whispered sharply. "Can't pin it," Mac replied. "They're using echo to confuse us." Vietnamese snipers were notorious for disappearing into the canopy, camouflaging themselves so effectively that they became part of the trees. They built nests in branches, holes in hollow trunks, platforms hidden under woven palm fronds. Some could remain still for hours, waiting for the perfect moment. A third shot cracked, this one slicing the air so close to Rourke's helmet, he felt the heat of its passage. He ducked instinctively, breath catching in his throat. Then the jungle fell silent again. No retreat, no footsteps, no movement. Just a hunter waiting. Ellery signaled the men to hold position. The humidity pressed against them like a heavy shroud, making it difficult to breathe. Rourke wiped sweat from his brow, but it did nothing to stop the trembling in his hands. Mac crawled to Rourke's side. "They're toying with us, trying to force panic." "What do we do?" Rourke whispered. "We wait. Listen, look for what doesn't belong." They scanned the canopy. It was a maze of green and brown branches interlocking like a woven net. Rourke's eyes darted from shadow to shadow, searching for a silhouette that didn't match. But every shape looked possible. Every shape looked deadly. A leaf drifted downward, spiraling gently. Hale tensed, raising his rifle. Mac grabbed his arm. "Easy. They want you twitchy." Minutes dragged into an agonizing hour. Sweat soaked through uniforms. Mosquitoes swarmed, but the men barely flinched, too focused on the canopy. Then Ortiz spotted it. "Left side," he whispered. "Third tree, 10 meters up." Rourke squinted. A strip of bark that should have been brown was instead tinted a faint olive-green painted fabric. Camouflage. The sniper was wedged deep between two branches covered in netting, motionless as stone. But the sniper wasn't alone. Half a meter away, another shape blended into the canopy, this one holding a rifle angled downward. "Two," Ortiz murmured. "Maybe more." Ellery didn't hesitate. "Claymores, angle them up." The men moved fast and quiet. Claymore mines were usually set at ground level, but they could angle them toward the canopy when needed. Ortiz and Mac positioned two of them behind a log, adjusting the tilt carefully. Ellery waited for a breath, then another. Now, Mac squeezed the clacker. A concussive blast ripped through the air, shredding the canopy with hundreds of steel balls. Leaves rained down like green snow. Two bodies dropped from the treetops, crashing through branches before hitting the ground with heavy thuds. Hale's eyes widened. Jesus! But there was no time to process it. A third sniper fired in retaliation, the shot smacking into a tree trunk inches from Delaney. "Move, spread," Ellery shouted. The platoon shifted positions, slipping deeper into cover. Rourke crawled behind a mound of roots, rifle ready, scanning for the third shooter. Before he could spot them, the jungle shifted again. Rustles, movements, the faint suggestion of shapes weaving through the branches. Not one sniper, not two, more. And they were repositioning. Charlie Company had survived the traps and the night whispers, but now the canopy itself was turning against them. The Viet Cong were tightening the noose. Lieutenant Ellery murmured into the radio voice, "Tight." "This is 6-1. Contact in the canopy. Multiple snipers. Requesting immediate air support at grid static." Swallowed the final words. Delaney adjusted the handset, shaking the unit. "Interference," he hissed. "They're jamming, or the terrain's eating the signal." The humidity thickened, trapping sound, bending it, hiding origins. The air felt heavy enough to choke. Rourke could taste the metallic fear rising in his throat. A fourth shot cracked from somewhere high above, sparking off a rock near Ortiz's head. The men hugged the dirt, waiting for the next one. But instead of a shot, they heard rustling, soft, rhythmic advancing. "Movement," Mac whispered. 2 o'clock, maybe more. Rourke peered through the undergrowth. At first, he saw nothing but leaves and vines. Then something shifted, a crouched figure sliding through the brush with astonishing silence. The fighter's face was streaked with mud, rifle wrapped in cloth to soften its silhouette, eyes sharp and focused. "Not snipers, scouts." They were closing in for real. Mac tapped Rourke's arm. "We hold until Ellery calls it. No premature fire." But the Viet Cong patrol wasn't approaching directly. They were spreading out, encircling the Americans the same way they circled them the night before. Charlie Company was being hunted. The first shot came from Hale's flank. He ducked down as a sniper round cut through a branch, inches from his helmet. Hale's voice cracked. I can't see any of them." Rourke grabbed him by the shoulder, gripping tightly. "Focus on what you can see, not what you can't." Hale nodded shakily, but fear had already carved deep lines into his expression. Ellery moved along the line, keeping low, whispering orders. "Rotate fields of fire. No bunching, no firing blind." But the enemy was no longer just above them. A twig snapped behind Rourke. He spun, rifle raised, heart slamming. A shadow darted between two tree trunks, small, fast, and silent. Rourke's breath caught. He almost fired, but the figure vanished before he could get a bead on it. Scouts testing us, Mac muttered, feeling for gaps. What happens when they find one? Rourke asked quietly. They don't test anymore. Ellery crawled to Delaney again. Try that line one more time. Delaney keyed the mic. 6-1, this is Wolfhound. Immediate danger, repeat. Immediate danger requesting. The transmission fizzled. Ellery swore under his breath. A sudden volley of gunfire erupted from the canopy, bullets slicing through leaves. The men ducked, returning short bursts where they spotted muzzle flashes. The jungle lit with streaks of orange and white mingling with the drifting fog. Ortiz shouted, "Sniper left tree 3 branches up." Mac and Rourke fired simultaneously. A figure fell crashing through vines before hitting the ground. But even as the body landed, the jungle shifted again, more movement deeper in the brush. The Viet Cong were pushing closer. Rourke scanned the shadows. 2 shapes broke from the tree line, rifles up. He fired, hitting one center mass. The other dove back into cover, disappearing instantly. Gunfire intensified. The snipers created chaos from above while the scouts probed from below. It was a layered assault conducted with precision. They're going to try to split us, Mac said. Cut the platoon in half. Ellery must have realized the same thing. Claymores front and right, he ordered. Ortiz and 2 others crawled to set the mines, angling them toward the densest foliage. The snipers fired again, the rounds thudding into trunks inches away. As Ortiz finished setting one claymore, a figure lunged from the brush, swinging the butt of a rifle. Ortiz blocked the blow, shoving the attacker aside. Rourke fired 2 shots, dropping the scout before he could rise. Ortiz, Mac called. You good? Ortiz wiped blood from his lip and nodded. Yeah, set. Ellery crawled across the line. When they push again, we detonate. The jungle rustled branches, bending vines, shaking. They were coming. The attack hit like a sudden storm. Gunfire burst from 3 directions, forcing the Americans to flatten themselves against the earth. Snipers in the canopy rained shots down, while scouts advanced through the brush, firing in short bursts. Hold, Ellery shouted. Hold until they're close. Rourke felt Hale trembling beside him, breath stuttering. I can't breathe. Yes, you can, Rourke said firmly, gripping Hale's arm. Listen to my voice, not the jungle. The rustling grew louder, feet on leaves, rifles clattering softly. Mac whispered now. The claymores roared outward in a deafening blast. The shock waves slammed through the clearing, shredding the brush and hurling bodies backward. The screams lasted only a moment before the jungle swallowed them. Silence returned, sudden and absolute. Even the snipers paused. Smoke drifted through the trees. Leaves rained down in slow spirals. The smell of explosives hung thick in the air. Hale stared at the destruction chest, heaving. Did we stop them? Mac shook his head grimly. No, we stopped the first wave. Behind the drifting smoke deeper in the jungle, more figures began to move. The second wave was coming. The Viet Cong were advancing again. Lieutenant Ellery saw it immediately. Shadows weaving through smoke, figures slipping between trees. A formation not scattered scouts. Positions, Ellery hissed. Second wave incoming. Mac tightened his grip on his rifle, eyes narrowing. They brought a whole squad this time. Maybe more. Rourke settled behind a fallen log, heart pounding. Hale lay beside him, still shaking from the first attack. But he raised his rifle with a determination born of pure survival instinct. The jungle shifted. A low command echoed faintly in Vietnamese, too distant to make out, but close enough to signal the push. Then the attack broke. Gunfire erupted from the tree line. Not random shots, controlled bursts, timed between the sniper strikes from above. Branches exploded near the American positions, bark splintering in every direction. Rourke ducked low, firing 2 shots toward a muzzle flash. Radio static crackled as Delaney tried again to reach command. Wolfhound to 6-1 troops in heavy contact. Repeat heavy contact, request immediate support. Only static answered. Still nothing, Delaney shouted. Ellery crawled to him, keeping his head down as sniper shots sliced overhead. Keep trying. Don't stop until someone hears you. The forest canopy erupted again with sniper fire, forcing the Americans to hug the dirt. The enemy had perfected the tempo. Snipers pinned them, ground fighters pushed forward. Rourke saw a figure dart behind a tree, firing from cover. He squeezed off a round, but the fighter vanished before the bullet struck. They're close, Ortiz called out. Left flank 15 meters. Mac rotated his squad. Shift left, cover that flank. Rourke and Hale slid behind a cluster of roots, opening fire as two Viet Cong fighters broke from the bushes. Hale hit one in the shoulder. Rourke hit the second in the chest. Both collapsed into the undergrowth. But more were coming. Branches shook as additional fighters pressed forward, moving with speed and precision. Their uniforms blended into the greens and browns of the jungle, making them difficult to distinguish from the foliage. The snipers above shifted again. A round slammed into the dirt inches from Rourke's elbow. Another cracked past Delaney's antenna. The canopy rained down fragments of leaves with each shot. Ortiz yelled, "We need to fall back to stronger cover." Ellery shook his head. "Negative. We fall back. They split us and roll the line. Hold here." But the pressure mounted fast. One enemy fighter crawled low beneath a patch of ferns, emerging almost on top of the right flank. Before he could fire, Mac swung his rifle and shot him point blank. The blast thundered in the confined space, leaving Hale momentarily stunned. A second fighter lunged from behind a stump, bayonet forward. Hale fired reflexively, dropping him mid-charge. Rourke grabbed Hale by the shoulder. "Good, stay with me." But the line was straining. The enemy wasn't going for a frontal wipe. They were working the edges, trying to wedge themselves between squads. "Right flank is bending," Ortiz shouted. "They're trying to cut us in two." Ellery made the call. "Third squad peel, right reinforce, everyone else hold your fire until they close." Gunfire roared like thunder. The clearing filled with smoke dust and streaks of tracer fire. Rourke's senses blurred. He heard Hale breathing hard beside him, heard Mac shouting orders, heard branches snapping as bodies moved through them. Then he heard something else. A faint click, 2 meters behind the log. Rourke's blood went cold. He turned slowly. A Viet Cong fighter had crawled through the brush, nearly invisible until now. His hand hovered over the firing mechanism of a small, improvised grenade. Rourke didn't think he lunged, knocking the man's hand aside. The grenade rolled from the fighter's fingers, bouncing once before coming to rest against a root. Mac saw it too. Grenade down. Rourke shoved Hale to the dirt and dropped beside him. A muffled blast shook the ground. Dirt rained onto their helmets. The explosion wasn't large, probably homemade, but it was strong enough to wound at close range. Splinters tore into the log above them, spraying fragments into the air. The fighter tried to scramble away, but Rourke fired once, ending the threat. The line held, but barely. Breathing hard, Rourke checked Hale. The private was trembling, but unharmed. "You saved me," Hale whispered. Rourke didn't answer. He just nodded and checked his magazine. Mac crawled over. "We're not done yet." Behind the smoke, more shapes emerged. A third wave. Larger, closer, determined to break Charlie Company once and for all. And as the jungle stirred with their approach, the snipers above readied themselves for another round of punishing fire. Charlie Company was running out of ammunition, running out of cover, running out of time. Lieutenant Ellery scanned the battlefield with quick, assessing eyes. "They're trying to flank left again, shift positions, keep the perimeter tight." The men moved, dragging themselves through mud, thick as glue. The heat pressed harder than before, as if the jungle itself wanted to smother them. The snipers resumed their rhythm, firing methodically, each shot carving holes into trees, helmets, and shattered branches. A bullet cracked into the bark inches above Rourke's head, showering him with splinters. Hale ducked instinctively, clutching his rifle. "They won't stop," Hale whispered, voice shaking. "They just won't stop." Rourke steadied him. "That's why we can't either." The third wave emerged from deeper foliage, 10, maybe 15 fighters moving with tighter formation. Their rifles barked in synchronized bursts. Flash suppressors glinted faintly in the filtered sunlight. These weren't scouts or snipers. They were shock troops preparing to crush the Americans before reinforcements could arrive. Mac slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. "This is it," he muttered. "They're throwing everything at us." Gunfire erupted again. Rourke fired until his rifle clicked empty. His hands moved on instinct, swapping magazines with practiced speed. Hale fired beside him, breathing in harsh, panicked grunts. Ortiz lobbed a grenade into a cluster of advancing fighters. It detonated with a harsh, concussive thud, flinging debris and bodies outward. But more filled the gap. Branches thrashed above as snipers repositioned. One took aim at Delaney's radio, firing a round that smashed directly into the antenna. The radio crackled violently, spitting sparks. "Damn it," Delaney cursed. "We're cut off!" Ellery slid in beside him. "Can you fix it?" "Not fast enough." Ellery bit down a curse. The sound of distant aircraft, normally a sign of hope, was nowhere to be heard. They were alone. Rourke's attention snapped left as something heavy crashed through underbrush. A fighter burst from the brush, sprinting low. Rourke fired, but the man dove behind a tree, returning controlled bursts. The rounds tore into the roots near Rourke's knee. Mac shouted, "Shift fire left, they're pushing that side." 2 more Viet Cong fighters moved in from the same direction using tree trunks as cover. Hale panicked, firing too high. His bullets chewed the canopy instead of the enemy. "Hale," Rourke barked. "Low aim, low." Hale forced himself to adjust. His next shot struck true, dropping one attacker. But as the enemy fighter fell, another figure emerged, a man carrying a satchel charge. His eyes locked onto the American line. Satchel charge meant one thing: they planned to blow open their cover. Mac, Rourke shouted. "Left side explosives." Mac rotated instantly, firing a 3-round burst. The fighter stumbled but didn't fall. He pressed forward, teeth clenched, clutching the satchel tight. Ortiz hurled another grenade. It detonated beside the man, sending him sprawling. The satchel skidded across the mud smoke rising from its side. Ellery's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't let that thing go off." Ortiz lunged forward, grabbing a fallen branch and batting the satchel deeper into the brush. A second later, a powerful explosion ripped through the undergrowth, blasting a crater into the earth. Dirt and leaves rained down across the line. Hale lay flat, chest heaving. "We're not going to make it," he whispered. Rourke grabbed his collar, pulling him close. "You listen to me. You keep fighting. You hear me." Hale nodded shakily. Mac crawled over, panting hard. "We need to fall back 20 meters. The line's buckling." Ellery hesitated. Falling back in a jungle firefight meant risking ambush traps, disorientation. But holding meant collapse. Before he could decide, a new sound erupted from the foliage. A high-pitched whistle, a signal. The Viet Cong fighters suddenly surged forward, all at once. Rourke fired as fast as he could pull the trigger. Hale screamed something unintelligible, spraying fire into the charging figures. Ellery shouted orders, drowned by the roar of gunfire. Ortiz tackled Delaney as a sniper round tore through the space where Delaney's head had been seconds before. Chaos swallowed the battlefield. Then Rourke felt a sudden shift. The pressure on the right flank vanished. The fighters who had been pushing hardest suddenly melted back into the jungle. "What are they doing?" Hale gasped. "Why are they pulling back?" Mac's eyes darted around, scanning for movement. "This isn't a retreat. They're repositioning." Ellery sensed it too. "Stay alert. They haven't given up." The jungle fell unnervingly silent. No rustle, no shout, no gunshot, just the suffocating quiet that came before something worse. Rourke realized what was happening. "They're circling," he whispered. "They're going to hit the rear." Ellery nodded grimly. "Everyone rotate, watch the back. They're coming again." The men turned just as branches snapped behind them. The fourth wave began. The Viet Cong hit from behind with brutal precision. Gunfire erupted at point-blank range. The tight perimeter shuddered under the sudden reversal. Mac shouted for the men to spread out and avoid bunching, but the terrain left little room. Roots twisted underfoot. Vines tugged at equipment, and fallen logs created choke points the enemy exploited mercilessly. Rourke fired on instinct, dropping one fighter who burst through a tangle of ferns. Hale beside him screamed in panic as another emerged from his blind spot, firing wildly. Rourke swung his rifle, cutting the attacker down before Hale could react. "Keep your eyes up," Rourke barked. "I'm trying," Hale's voice cracked. "I can't see anything in this damn jungle." Bullets cracked past them, snapping vines like wire. The snipers above rejoined the assault, firing down with cold calculation. Their shots forced the Americans to crouch low, compressing their line even further. Lieutenant Ellery crawled over a fallen trunk, shouting above the chaos. "Hold this flank. Do not let them breach the center." But the center was already collapsing. Ortiz dove behind a stump as 2 fighters charged from the rear, shooting from the hip. Delaney tried to backpedal, dragging the damaged radio. A round grazed his helmet, spinning him sideways. Rourke could hear the panic in the radio operator's voice as he scrambled for cover. Mac Ellery shouted, "Get second squad to tighten the gap." Mac was already moving. Second shift left cover the breach. The men pivoted through the dense foliage, firing short bursts to force the attackers back. Leaves shredded in every direction, filling the air with drifting green confetti. Rourke took a knee, firing toward a cluster of moving shadows. His rounds punched into one fighter's chest, sending him tumbling backward. But as that man fell, another launched himself from the brush, teeth clenched around a grenade pin. Rourke barely had time to react. He fired twice, dropping the man. The grenade rolled from the fighter's limp hand, bouncing to a stop by a root. Grenade hail shrieked. Mac hurled himself forward, kicking the device down a natural incline between two roots. A split second later, the explosion ripped through the earth, throwing dust and bark into the air. Hale coughed violently, eyes watering. How many waves do they have? Rourke scanned the trees, his pulse hammering. As many as it takes. The jungle roared with incoming fire. The rear assault intensified. Several Viet Cong fighters advanced in a wedge formation, trying to carve open the center of the American line. Ellery barked commands, voice hoarse. Hold them, hold them. Rourke and Hale fired in unison, striking two attackers. A third dove behind a fallen tree, popping up to fire controlled bursts into the U.S. perimeter. Bullets chewed into Delaney's radio pack, sending shards of metal flying. Radio's completely dead, Delaney yelled. Ellery clenched his jaw. Then we do this without support, Ortiz shouted across the line. Right side is buckling. They're moving around us again. Mac grimaced. They want a full encirclement. Rourke realized the grim truth: the attackers weren't trying to wipe them out in one push. They were squeezing them, driving Charlie Company into a smaller and smaller perimeter until retreat was impossible. He crawled forward, eyes scanning for movement. Sweat and mud blurred his vision. The humidity was suffocating, turning every breath into a struggle. The jungle stank of gunpowder, blood, and rotting vegetation. A fighter darted toward them on the right. Rourke fired, dropping him, but another immediately took the dead man's position, pressing forward, rifle flashing. Hale screamed as a bullet grazed his thigh. Rourke dragged him behind a thick root cluster. It's just a scratch, Rourke insisted. Keep pressure on it. Hale nodded, face pale. They're everywhere. Max slid beside them, firing over the log. They're trying to overwhelm us before we can regroup. Ellery wants to collapse to the inner line. Rourke nodded sharply. What's left of it? Not much, Mac admitted, but it's better than staying stretched. Ellery shouted to the entire platoon. Fall back to secondary positions. Contract, contract. Keep your sectors, but pull tight. Charlie Company began a controlled collapse inward, a dangerous maneuver under fire. The Viet Cong capitalized immediately, rushing the thinning outer perimeter. Gunfire intensified. Explosions rippled through the trees. The shriek of ricochets echoed beneath the canopy. Rourke helped Hale limp toward the new defensive position. Mac covered their movement, firing controlled bursts at approaching shadows. Ortiz and Delaney dragged the wounded to the inner ring, shouting for others to move. The Americans gathered behind a cluster of downed trees and thick roots, forming a makeshift barricade. The new perimeter was tighter, too tight, but it gave them overlapping fields of fire. Positions Ellery called, "This is our last hold." The Viet Cong broke through the smoke and foliage, again rushing toward the Americans' new defensive line. Their feet slammed into mud and broken branches. Their rifles barked. They pushed with renewed ferocity. Rourke's rifle bucked as he fired. Mac reloaded beside him, jaw clenched. Hale steadied his breathing, aiming low like Rourke had taught him. The new line held barely, but the fighters kept coming, one after another, wave after wave, until finally, the gunfire slowed. Not because the Americans were winning, but because the enemy was repositioning again. Mac's eyes narrowed. They're not done. Ellery nodded grimly. They're setting up something bigger. The jungle fell silent once more. But this time the silence felt intentional, like a held breath before a storm. We need to be ready, Rourke murmured. Because deep in the trees, faint shapes were moving again, more disciplined, better armed, and approaching rapidly. The next wave would not be scouts, not snipers, not probing fighters. These would be shock troops meant to finish the job. Rourke crouched behind the barricade of roots and shattered branches, scanning the dim foliage ahead. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Sweat dripped from his chin, soaking into the mud. Hale knelt beside him, one hand pressed against his grazed thigh, the other gripping his rifle so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Mac raised binoculars, adjusting them slowly. Movement, he whispered. Not scouts. Heavily armed. 10, no more. They're bringing a hardened unit. Ortiz crawled over, wiping grime from his face. They're preparing something coordinated. They want to wipe us out here. Delaney cursed under his breath, glaring at the broken radio pack. If I could get one damn signal out, we'd have air on them in minutes. Save your breath, Mac said. They know exactly what they're doing. They jammed us or picked a dead zone on purpose. Rourke steadied his rifle. The weight felt heavier than before. Whatever's coming, it's their big play. Ellery moved along the line on hands and knees, keeping low as he addressed the men. His voice was calm, sharp, cutting through the tension. This is it. They're going to hit us in force. Ammo check. The soldiers quickly inspected their magazines. Rourke had 2 left. Hale had 1.5. Mac held up 3. Ortiz had 2 grenades remaining, one of them dented. It wasn't much. Ellery nodded grimly. Make every shot count. A faint clicking echoed through the trees. Metal touching metal, magazines being seated, bolts being pulled. Not American. Enemy. They're close, Hale whispered. Rourke placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. Stay with me. The canopy rustled sharply. Then something streaked through the air, a cluster of bamboo-tipped spears launched from hidden slings. They thudded into trees and mud, one embedding itself in the root inches from Rourke's leg. Contact incoming, Mac shouted. Then the jungle exploded. A surge of Viet Cong fighters burst through the foliage, sprinting low, firing in measured bursts. Their formation was tighter, their advance cleaner. These weren't conscripts or local guerrillas. These were hardened cadres, battle-tested. Gunfire erupted across the line. M16s cracked muzzle flashes, lighting the dim jungle. Rourke fired 3 rounds, striking a fighter who tried to flank left. Hale fired beside him, teeth-gritted muzzle, rising and falling with each controlled burst. Ortiz lobbed a grenade. It detonated behind a cluster of trees, sending fighters scattering. But for each one that fell, 2 more pushed forward. Hold, Ellery barked. Hold your ground. Mac fired steadily, picking off targets with precision. They're too many. They're pushing the center. A fighter rushed the barricade, brandishing a bayonet. Rourke swung his rifle and fired point-blank the impact, flinging the man backward. Another fighter leapt over the same fallen log, firing downward. Hale screamed and rolled aside as bullets tore through the branches above him. Rourke tackled the attacker, driving his shoulder into the man's chest. They slammed into the mud. The fighter clawed for his sidearm, but Rourke struck first, wrenching the rifle from the man's grasp and delivering a desperate blow with the buttstock. The jungle swallowed the sound. Rourke scrambled back to position, chest heaving. Right flank collapsing, Ortiz yelled. Mac pivoted, firing at fighters pushing through a narrow corridor between 2 massive roots. I see them. One fighter hurled a homemade explosive. It struck the barricade and detonated into a shower of splinters. Rourke shielded Hale with his body as debris rained down. Ellery shouted, "Pull them back! Don't let them breach!" The enemy kept coming. Rourke fired until his rifle clicked. No ammo. He reached for his last magazine with shaking hands, slamming it into place. Hale tossed him a half-full one. "You'll shoot better with it," Hale gasped. Rourke didn't argue. He gave Hale a quick nod and turned to fire at another advancing fighter. Bodies fell, leaves burned, smoke rose in choking pillars. Still they came. It became clear that Charlie Company wasn't fighting an assault, they were fighting extermination. The Viet Cong weren't pushing them back. They were trying to swallow them whole. Mac crawled beside Rourke, blood streaking his helmet. "They're almost on top of us if we don't break this wave." A shrill whistle pierced the air. Mac's eyes widened. "Get ready, that's a push signal." The jungle erupted again as dozens of fighters surged toward the American position, shouting, firing, advancing as one. Ellery braced himself. "Everyone stand and fight. This is the line. Do not let them break it." Rourke rose to one knee and fired into the mass. Hale shouted something drowned by the roar of gunfire. Ortiz pulled the pin on his last grenade and hurled it. Delaney used his rifle like a club, smashing an attacker who climbed over the barricade. The line buckled, bent, threatened to snap. But it did not break. Rourke had no sense of time, only noise heat and motion. Only the recoil of his rifle and the scream of incoming fire. Only the desperate cries of his comrades and the relentless advance of the enemy. Then slowly. The pressure began to ease. The firing thinned. The bodies stopped rushing forward. Figures retreated into the brush, dragging wounded fighters with them. The snipers fired less frequently, then fell silent altogether. Footsteps retreated, swallowed by the thicket. And suddenly the jungle grew quiet again. Mac slumped beside Rourke, panting. Did we stop them? Ellery scanned the tree line, sweat dripping from his chin. For now. Hale collapsed to his knees, trembling. I thought they were going to kill us all. Rourke lowered his rifle, chest heaving. They tried. The air felt thick, unmoving. The men looked at each other with hollow eyes. They had survived the deadliest assault so far, but they were wounded, exhausted, low on ammunition, and cut off. And deep in the jungle, the enemy was regrouping. Charlie Company knew one truth. The next wave might be the last. Rourke wiped his brow with a trembling hand. Around him, men inspected their weapons with grim resignation. Almost every rifle had run dangerously low on ammunition. Jittery breathing filled the gaps between the cicada's slow return. Lieutenant Ellery crawled across the line, checking each man with quiet urgency. Anyone who can still move, prepare to relocate. We can't hold this position if they hit us again. Mac frowned. You think they will? Ellery nodded. They're regrouping. They'll come back stronger with heavier fire or explosives. We're too exposed. We move before they tighten the loop. Delaney groaned, glancing at the ruined radio. Even if we move, sir, we're blind. No comms, no support. Ellery placed a steady hand on Delaney's shoulder. Then we navigate by instinct. And pray. Rourke scanned the tree line one more time. What had been an ordinary stretch of jungle hours before now resembled a living nightmare, traps, bodies, shredded vegetation, and the lingering sense that unseen eyes still watched them. Hale whispered. Where do we go? Mac answered grimly. Anywhere that isn't here. Ellery raised his hand sharply. Form up. Close ranks. We head east toward the river. If we make the bank, we can call for extraction or regroup with Bravo. The squad moved slowly, carefully, stepping around bodies both friend and enemy. The stillness felt fragile, as if one careless footstep might shatter it and bring the jungle crashing down on them again. They entered a corridor of thick vines. The light dimmed. Humidity clung to their skin like a second layer of clothing. Every step produced a squelch in the mud or a soft crack of twigs, each sound far louder than it should have been. Halfway down the slope, Rourke stopped suddenly. Mac turned. What is it? Rourke pointed at a patch of disturbed soil, a pattern too clean, too circular. Another trap. Mac guided the men around it, muttering under his breath. Even on retreat, they're trying to bleed us. They continued forward. Then the jungle shifted again, a faint rustle behind them. Leaves settling where no one had stepped. A creeping sense of the unseen. They're following, Hale, whispered voice tight. Rourke strained his ears. The jungle buzzed, but beneath the insects he sensed coordinated movement, careful, calculated mirroring their pace. Ellery signaled the men to keep moving. Don't stop unless you see them. But as they reached the edge of a ravine, a rifle cracked from behind. A round zipped past Ortiz's shoulder. Another slammed into a tree trunk inches from Hale's leg. They're flanking left, Mac shouted. Ellery pointed down the ravine. Go into the gully. Charlie Company slid down the muddy incline, grabbing branches and roots to steady themselves. As they reached the bottom, bullets tore overhead, cutting through the vine canopy. The terrain funneled them into a narrow creek bed. Water splashed around their boots as they pressed forward. Mac pointed ahead urgently. Rivers close, half a click. Gunfire echoed through the trees behind them. Shadows darted along the ridge. They're coming fast, Delaney yelled. Rourke shouted over the chaos, keep moving. Branches snapped. A fighter appeared high on the ridge, aiming downward. Mac fired first, hitting the man before he could shoot. They pushed deeper until the distant rumble of rushing water grew stronger. Then suddenly open space. The tree line broke away to reveal the wide sweep of a muddy river, the current shifting in brown, churning waves. The air smelled of algae and sediment, a rough change from the heavy scent of blood and gunpowder behind them. But hope was fragile. As they stepped into the clearing, a volley of sniper fire rang out from the opposite bank. Bullets punched into the dirt, kicking up sprays of mud. Rourke dropped to his knees, dragging Hale down with him. Mac slid behind a fallen tree. Ellery scanned their flanks wildly. "They're on both sides now," Ortiz shouted. "We're boxed in." "No," Ellery said, breathing hard. "We still have one way out." He pointed downriver to a narrow bend where the current slowed and tall reeds provided concealment. Rourke understood instantly. "We move now or we die here." The company sprinted toward the reeds as gunfire erupted from both banks. Bullets tore into the water around them, sending sharp bursts of spray into their faces. Hale stumbled, but Rourke grabbed him, hauling him toward cover. Mac fired blindly to buy time. Delaney shielded the wounded with his body. Ortiz threw his last grenade, judging the arc perfectly. It detonated near the ridge, forcing the pursuing fighters to scatter. They collapsed behind the reeds, breathing hard. Ellery whispered urgently, "Stay low. Wait for the lull." Seconds passed like hours. The gunfire quieted first from the opposite bank, then from behind. The jungle settled uncertain, then silence, real silence. For the first time since the ambush began, the enemy had lost track of them. Ellery leaned close to his surviving men. "We follow the river until we're clear of this sector. Then we signal. We don't stop. We don't talk. We don't fall behind." Rourke nodded, steadying Hale with an arm around his shoulders. Mac took point, moving silently along the muddy bank. As they faded into the reeds, Rourke looked back once more at the jungle behind them, the place where they'd nearly died. The place filled with horrors no briefing could ever explain. The place that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Some battles were fought with bullets, others were fought with silence. And in Vietnam, the silence lasted far longer.